Now, we're very lucky indeed that Denis Rogatyuk, who's been a guest on the show before, is with us this evening because he has no less than 3 of our key issues tonight well under his purview. He's formerly a correspondent in Latin America with a particular interest in Bolivia, where there was an attempted coup d'etat organized by the CIA just this week. Or was it organized by the CIA? Perhaps we'll press home that point. But Denis is also an Australian of Russian extraction and was in Australia when Julian Assange got back. And because he's a Russian, he can also speak about Europe. Denis, very, very big welcome to you. You're a journalist, filmmaker, and you're the international director of El Ciudadano. So let's start with the Latin American part of your portfolio. What on earth happened in Bolivia this week?
First of all, thank you so much, George. It is always such a pleasure to be on the mother of all talk shows, and especially this week, such a tumultuous week across the world. And in Bolivia, well, this week is unfortunately what happened in Bolivia is something that has happened almost 190 times in the history of Bolivia. That is an attempted coup. Indeed, Bolivia has experienced the largest number of attempted or successful military takeovers than any other nation in Latin America. So these things have unfortunately become almost like a run-of-the-mill political events. The latest successful coup that we observed, that I personally observed when I was in Bolivia in November 2019, was of course the military coup against President Evo Morales, and that one was successful. That one had the fingerprints of the CIA and the U.S. State Department and so many atrocious, right-wing figures in Bolivia and abroad over it. But for the moment, I wanted to turn our attention to what happened in Bolivia this week, as I mentioned. There was an attempted military takeover of the presidential palace and the main government administrative building in the capital of La Paz on June 26. This military assault was led by the Bolivian Army Brigadier General named Juan Zuniga, who up until Tuesday was actually the commander-in-chief of the ground forces of the Bolivian Bolivian army, and he was dismissed from his position after he publicly threatened to prevent the presidential candidacy of Evo Morales in the upcoming general elections that are coming up in 2025. Now, he was dismissed hours after making this statement, and the following day, exactly at 3:51 p.m., himself, a dozen officers, and a few hundred soldiers that were part of his regiment, occupied the main central plaza of La Paz, Plaza Murillo, which is just opposite of the presidential palace, and attempted a takeover of the palace. In fact, they rammed through the front gates using an armored personnel carrier. And after entering the palace, they were actually confronted by the current president, Lucho Arce Catacora, who is also from the Movement Towards Socialism party, where the president ordered them to stand down. And what ensued then was perhaps one of the most confusing 90 minutes that we have seen in the Bolivian politics as of late, because straight after this confrontation, President Arce actually dismissed the entire high military command of the Bolivian armed forces, that is, the chief of the army, chief of the navy, and chief of the air force, replacing them with individuals that were seen to be far more loyal. A lightning response, really. And in the meantime, the pro-coup military were camped out there in the central plaza, kind of expecting the other sections of the military or perhaps other people to join them. And instead, what they received were this mass rally of thousands and thousands of Bolivian supporters of MAS, supporters of Lucho Arce, supporters of Evo Morales, rallying in the plaza against this attempt to at regime change. So at 5:30 p.m., that's approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes after the coup began, the troops started to withdraw from the plaza, and sort of one by one, the different officers and eventually Juan Zuniga himself were captured. So the last of them were rounded up by approximately 7 p.m. Of that evening. A total of 17 military officials arrested that day. So a truly bizarre turn of events, if I would say, because when it comes to military coups in Latin America, I believe that we've actually, when we think about military coups in Latin America, I believe the first thing that comes to mind is September 11, 1973, against Salvador Allende, one of the most brutal military coups and successful ones as well. Or the latest one in November of 2019 against Evo Morales. This comes across as, I would say, a recipe of how not to conduct a military coup, if I can express myself this way. And this, I believe, has created the aftermath of the coup has in some ways created even more confusion and turmoil than there existed beforehand, if you can understand me. But yes, I'd like to go into
I do understand you,
detail.
But as someone who lived through the farce in Grenada when the New Jewel movement imploded, with one section overthrowing the other section, I was intrigued at the thesis that actually all was not what it seemed, that President Arce is not too happy about making way for Evo Morales in 25, and that their movement, this MAS movement towards socialism, is split, and that the what seemed to be a classical, if farcical, military coup organized from Washington might actually not have been that, but might have been an attempt by President Arce to keep Morales out of the presidency next year. What's your take on that?
That is certainly a popular theory that has been circulating around the political circles across Bolivia. In fact, I believe just yesterday, during a mass meeting of some of the social movements and trade union movements that supporting Evo and are supporting his candidacy in the next election, actually openly accused President Lucho Arce in being the main man behind this attempted farce of a coup. At the same time, unfortunately, there have been some of the parliamentarians and politicians of MAS, which are loyal to President Arce, they accused Evo Morales of being behind this. So this, unfortunately, this whole episode has effectively is now being used by these two sides as a leverage against each other, and basically as a springboard for what happens in next year. Whether I buy into these kinds of theories, I will say this, George. I do not believe that there was at least any direct CIA involvement or foreign government involvement, because trust me, I have seen what a CIA-backed military coup looks like firsthand in Bolivia, and that was a very well planned operation, with local right-wing leaders, with the mass violent protests organized against the government, with police mutiny organized as well, and finally a military coup, a very coherent, well organized, well financed, well structured operation. This I saw absolutely none of that in this in what happened on June 26th.
Well, listen, Denis, we need to turn to another subject because time is running. All eyes were on Australia at the arrival of the world's most famous political prisoner, the world's greatest publisher, journalist, whistleblower. Julian Assange is reunited with his family in his home country. What happens next?
It was quite a moment because we were gathered there at the airport, right at the landing strip, or was it awaiting the arrival of Julian. I would say the first few minutes of Julian's arrival on the Australian soil were very telling, because he was finally able to embrace his wife Stella. He was able to embrace his father John. And finally thank his supporters for more than a decade of solidarity with him. During the press conference of Stella and of course of Julian's lawyers, Jennifer and Barry, it became very, very obvious that although Julian is in very high spirits and of course very glad that he's out of the Belmarsh gulag, he will need time to recuperate. And Stella has effectively become his new unofficial, or I say official spokeswoman. Beg your pardon. From what we've seen and from the kind of energy that I feel here, that I felt both from Stella and from John Shipton, it seems obvious that Julian wants to continue with the work that he has been doing, perhaps in a different way. But this is not a person. Julian is not a person that would simply leave behind the labor for which he suffered 5 years in prison, and also almost 8 years of isolation at the Ecuadorian embassy. This is a man of passion, and a passion for his work and for journalism.
Will he be allowed by the Australian government to ply his former trade, or might he have to move on somewhere else?
That's an excellent question, George, and I believe the clue to this, I'll say the answer, or let's say at least the biggest clue that we have right now, it actually lies in that bargain that was conducted between Julian and the U.S. authorities. Because we have to remember that Julian pleaded guilty to the charge of espionage and attempting to obtain secret national defense documents from the United States. And as part of the deal, he was also ordered, to directly oversee that the WikiLeaks destroys the saved files and does not release them in any way, shape, or form. So, I believe that despite this huge victory that has been achieved, it also comes with a veiled threat against Julian. That is to say that if the files which that they spoke of, if somehow some of them end up on public websites, on any other way, I believe this could be a way for actually United States to maybe not rescind on a deal, not go back on their word, but perhaps invent some new charge against Julian, and attempt to extradite him from from Australia. So I believe at the moment there's there's a sense of cautious optimism about what kind of work Julian will continue. But rest assured, we will be hearing a lot more from Julian once he is back on his feet and once he's spent time with his family.
Let's hope so. Denis Rogatyuk, thank you for that tour of the horizon. I'm much obliged to you. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.